Before we open this classified file and step into the shadows of 1983, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are uncovering history one secret at a time, and you won't want to miss what comes next. On the morning of October 24, 1983, the world was holding its breath. In Europe, NATO was preparing for Exercise Able Archer, a war game so realistic that the Kremlin believed it might be the cover for a genuine first strike. In Washington, D.C., the mood was electric, paranoid, and aggressively patriotic. But inside a red brick colonial house on a tree-lined street in Georgetown, the only tension that mattered was the silence between Dr. Arthur Sterling and his wife, Clara. Arthur was 45 years old, a brilliant, if somewhat socially awkward physicist working for a private defense contractor heavily involved in the Strategic Defense Initiative, the program the press had dubbed Star Wars. He was the kind of man who wore cardigans in July and forgot to eat lunch if not reminded. Clara Sterling was 42, a senior archivist at the Library of Congress. She dealt in facts, in preservation, in the meticulous organizing of history. To their neighbors, they were the perfect, boring Washington couple. They had no children, they drove a Volvo, and they hosted dinner parties where the conversation never strayed too far from local zoning laws or the weather. But routine is often the best camouflage for deception. Clara had noticed the shift in late August. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. It was the small deviations in the algorithm of their marriage. Arthur had always been a creature of habit. He left the house at 7:15 a.m., arrived at his office in Rosslyn by 7:45 a.m., and was home by 6:30 p.m. to watch the evening news. Then, the timeline began to fracture. The 6:30 p.m. arrival became 8 p.m., then 9:30 p.m. He blamed the workload. He said the Department of Defense was pushing for accelerated testing on the laser guidance systems. He said the pressure from the White House was trickling down to the labs, creating a pressure cooker environment that demanded late nights and working weekends. Clara wanted to believe him. In 1983, everyone in D.C. felt the weight of the Cold War. It was plausible. But Clara Sterling spent her days analyzing documents, looking for provenance, checking sources. Her mind was trained to spot inconsistencies, and Arthur was becoming inconsistent. He stopped wearing his glasses at home, claiming his prescription had improved, which was medically unlikely. He bought 3 new suits in a month, Italian cut, far more fashionable than his usual tweed. And he started listening to jazz. Arthur hated jazz. He liked Bach. He liked structure. Jazz was chaotic, improvisational. Yet, one evening in October, she found him in the study, staring out the window with a glass of sherry, listening to a Miles Davis record she didn't know they owned. "It helps me think," he had said when she asked him about it. But he didn't look like a man who was thinking about physics. He looked like a man who was remembering a feeling. The breaking point, the moment the invisible fault line in their marriage finally snapped, happened on a Tuesday. It was laundry day. Clara was emptying the pockets of Arthur's gray suit jacket before taking it to the dry cleaners. Usually she found receipts for sandwiches, maybe a gum wrapper. That morning she found a book of matches. It was sleek, black, with gold lettering. The Velvet Lounge. Clara knew the city. She knew that the Velvet Lounge was a high-end piano bar in Adams Morgan, a place known for dim lighting, expensive cocktails, and a clientele that preferred not to be recognized. It was not a place for defense contractors discussing laser optics. It was a place for lovers. She held the matchbook in her hand, feeling the cardboard edge press into her skin. It smelled faintly of clove cigarettes, a scent Arthur detested. She put the matchbook in her pocket. She didn't confront him, not yet. In the world of archiving, you don't make a claim until you have the primary source documents to back it up. She decided she would get them. The next 3 weeks were a study in agonizing patience. Clara continued to make coffee in the mornings, continued to ask about his day, continued to feign ignorance, but her eyes were recording everything. She noticed that Arthur was taking better care of himself. He was shaving twice a day. The scent of a new, musk-heavy cologne replaced the smell of old paper and chalk that usually clung to him. On November 2nd, Arthur announced he had to go to a conference in New York for 3 days. "Standard briefing," he said, avoiding eye contact as he packed a suitcase. "Just some bureaucrats from the UN and a few NATO liaisons. Boring stuff, really. Where are you staying? Clara asked, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. The Hilton, Midtown, he replied too quickly. Do you have the number, in case of an emergency? Arthur hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was there. I'll call you when I check in. The switchboard there is a nightmare. He kissed her on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture, and left. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, Clara went to the phone. She waited 2 hours, calculating the drive time to the train station and the train ride to New York. Then she called the New York Hilton. I'd like to leave a message for a guest, Mr. Arthur Sterling, she said, her voice steady. The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. I'm sorry, ma'am, the receptionist said. We have no one by that name registered and no reservations under Sterling for this week. Are you sure? Perhaps under his company, Aerodyne Systems? I've checked both, ma'am. Nothing. Clara hung up. The silence of the house seemed to amplify the beating of her heart. He wasn't in New York, or at least he wasn't where he said he was. She went to his study. Arthur was careful, but he was arrogant. He believed Clara was exactly who she appeared to be. A quiet, unassuming woman interested only in the Dewey Decimal System. He underestimated her capacity for forensic investigation. She didn't hack a safe or pick a lock. She simply looked at the family checkbook, which sat in the top drawer of his desk. He handled the finances, but the ledger was shared. She opened it. The entries were written in his neat block handwriting. Mortgage, utilities, grocery. But there were cash withdrawals. Significant ones. $300 here, $200 there. All listed as consulting expenses. Then she turned to the trash can. It was empty, save for a few crumpled tissues. But Arthur had a shredder, a novelty he had bought recently. The bin beneath it was full of cross-cut strips of paper. Clara took the bin. She carried it to the dining room table, spread a dark tablecloth, and dumped the confetti of secrets out. It took her 4 hours. It was a puzzle of tedious complexity, but Clara had spent 20 years reconstructing damaged manuscripts from the 18th century. Piecing together a few modern receipts was child's play by comparison. She used tweezers and clear tape. Slowly, a receipt from a jeweler in Georgetown formed. A purchase made 2 weeks ago. A gold locket. Price, $450. Clara had not received a locket. She also pieced together a torn flyer for a gallery opening in DuPont Circle. Modernist Perspectives. The Art of the Eastern Bloc. The date was for that evening. The gallery was called The Red Door. Arthur wasn't in New York. He was here, in the city, and he was going to an art gallery. The betrayal felt physical, a punch to the gut that left her breathless. But beneath the hurt, a cold, hard anger began to crystallize. If he was having an affair, she was going to see the woman who was worth destroying their 18-year marriage for. She stood up, brushed the paper dust from her skirt, and went to her closet. She chose a black trench coat and a scarf that could cover her hair. She wasn't going to be Clara the wife tonight. She was going to be a witness. DuPont Circle in the rain was a kaleidoscope of neon lights reflecting on wet asphalt. It was 7:30 p.m. Clara parked her car 3 blocks away and walked toward the Red Door. The gallery was squeezed between a bookstore and a travel agency. The windows were large, displaying abstract sculptures of twisted metal that looked like the wreckage of a crash. Inside, the crowd was a mix of Washington's intelligentsia, junior diplomats, wealthy socialites, and bearded academics. Waiters circulated with trays of cheap champagne. Clara slipped in, keeping her back to the wall, pulling her scarf tighter. She scanned the room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw him almost immediately. Arthur was standing near a large, aggressive painting of red and black geometric shapes. He was holding a wine glass, wearing one of his new Italian suits. He looked different. His posture was straighter, his laugh louder. He looked younger, vibrant, and completely unlike the man who fell asleep in front of the television every night at 8:30. And then, she saw the woman. She walked toward Arthur with a confidence that sucked the air out of the room. She was tall, with sharp cheekbones and blonde hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. She wore a crimson dress that was entirely inappropriate for a Tuesday night in D.C., but perfect for making a statement. She placed a hand on Arthur's arm, a gesture of familiarity and possession that made Clara's stomach turn. Arthur leaned in, whispering something in her ear. The woman laughed, throwing her head back. It was a performance of intimacy. Clara moved closer, hiding behind a pillar, trying to catch their voices over the ambient drone of the party. "You worry too much, darling," the woman said. Her voice was low, smoky, with an accent Clara couldn't quite place. It wasn't heavy, just a slight elongation of the vowels. European. "The reception is lovely." "I just don't like being this exposed," Arthur replied, his voice tight. "If anyone from the office—" "No one from your office comes to places like this," she soothed him, running a finger down his lapel. "They are all at home, watching sitcoms with their boring wives." Clara flinched. The insult was sharp, but what caught her attention was the way the woman's eyes were moving. While she flirted with Arthur, while she touched him, her gaze was scanning the room, checking the exits, watching the door. It wasn't the look of a lover lost in the moment. It was the look of a sentry on duty. A man in a leather jacket approached them. He didn't introduce himself. He simply nodded at the woman and handed her a brochure. She took it without looking at it and slipped it into her clutch purse immediately. The exchange took less than 3 seconds. "Who is that?" Arthur asked, looking jealous. "Just a critic," the woman said dismissively. "Ignore him. Tell me more about the project, Arthur. You said the testing phase was difficult." "Not here, Veronica," Arthur hissed. "Veronica." Clara whispered the name to herself. "Arthur, you promised." Veronica pouted, a theatrical expression. "I love it when you talk about your work. It makes you sound so powerful." Arthur blushed, actually blushed. "It's just, the thermal shielding isn't holding up. We're having trouble with the refraction rates. If we can't stabilize the beam, the whole initiative is $1 billion flashlight." Clara froze. She wasn't a physicist, but she had been married to one long enough to know the vocabulary. Arthur was discussing classified limitations of the SDI program in the middle of an art gallery. This wasn't just pillow talk. This was a breach of national security. The realization washed over her like ice water. This wasn't a normal affair. The strange behavior, the new clothes, the consulting cash. Arthur wasn't just being seduced by a younger woman. He was being groomed. Clara left the gallery before they did. She sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't even realized were on the page. Veronica. She needed to know who this woman was. Clara drove home, but she didn't sleep. She sat in the dark living room, waiting. Arthur didn't come home that night. He was in New York, after all. The next morning, Clara called in sick to the Library of Congress. It was the first unscheduled day off she had taken in 7 years. She drove to the library anyway, but not to her office. She went to the periodicals annex. If Veronica owned or managed the Red Door, there would be records, public filings, arts reviews. Clara pulled the microfiche for the DC Arts and Culture columns for the last 2 years. She scrolled through glowing green screens of text, her eyes scanning for the name. She found it in a Washington Post lifestyle piece from 6 months ago. "New blood in the art scene. Veronica Miller brings European flair to DuPont." The article was fluff. It described Veronica Miller as an art enthusiast who spent years in Paris and Vienna before settling in the capital. It mentioned she was a patron of avant-garde expressionism. But there were gaps. The article mentioned she had studied at the Sorbonne. Clara moved to the international directories. She cross-referenced the alumni lists for the years Veronica would have been there. No Veronica Miller. She checked the business license for the Red Door. It was registered to a holding company in Delaware, a classic shell structure used to mask ownership. Clara dug deeper. She looked for marriage records, birth certificates. Nothing. Veronica Miller had seemingly popped into existence in Washington, D.C. in 1981. Before that, she was a ghost. Then Clara found the photo. It was in a society column from a fundraiser for East-West Cultural Exchange, dated January 1982. Veronica was in the background, holding a champagne flute. Standing next to her was a man Clara recognized from the news, Viktor Chebrikov. At the time, he was a high-ranking official in the Soviet embassy. Today, he was the head of the KGB. Clara printed the image. The grain was coarse, but the proximity was undeniable. Veronica wasn't looking at Chebarkov with the awe of a socialite meeting a dignitary. She was leaning away from him, their body language suggesting a covert conversation, not a social pleasantry. The pieces fell into a terrifying pattern. The consulting fees Arthur was receiving, was that payment? Or was he paying her? No, the cash withdrawals were from their account. Arthur was paying for the privilege of being played. Or perhaps the money was a test. Clara returned home at 4 p.m. Arthur arrived at 6 p.m., looking exhausted and disheveled, carrying his suitcase. "Home from the wars," he announced, trying to sound cheerful. "New York was a nightmare. Traffic was backed up to the tunnel." "Did you learn anything interesting?" Clara asked from the kitchen, chopping carrots with a rhythmic, violent cadence. "Just bureaucratic nonsense," Arthur sighed, pouring himself a drink. "How was your week?" "Quiet," Clara said. "I did some reading." Arthur didn't notice the edge in her voice. He was too busy being relieved that his lie had apparently worked. He went upstairs to shower. Clara waited until she heard the water running. Then she moved. She went to the hallway where he had dropped his briefcase. It was a brown leather attaché case, locked. Arthur had never locked his briefcase inside the house before this month. She knew the combination. It was his birthday, 0412. He was not a creative man despite his sudden interest in jazz. The latches clicked open with a soft snap. Inside, there were the usual papers, technical journals, drafts of memos. But in the back pocket, tucked behind a legal pad, was a manila envelope. Clara opened it. Photos. Not of documents, but of Arthur. Arthur and Veronica. They were intimate, compromising photos taken in a hotel room. But they weren't Polaroids snapped by lovers. They were high-quality, surveillance-style photos, taken from angles that suggested hidden cameras. And with the photos, a letter. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed. "My dearest Arthur, the time we spend together is the only thing that makes this city bearable. But my friends are asking for more progress. The next batch of schematics needs to be complete. They are growing impatient, and I would hate for these beautiful memories of us to find their way to your wife, or worse, your security officer at Aerodyne. Bring the file on the Prism array on Friday, same time. Love, V." Clara stared at the letter. Her hands began to shake, not with fear, but with a profound, nauseating realization. It wasn't just seduction. It was blackmail. A classic honey trap. Veronica had seduced him, documented the affair, and was now using the threat of exposure to force him into espionage. Arthur wasn't just a cheater. He was a traitor. And he was being played for a fool. Chapter 5. The Weight of Treason. Clara closed the briefcase. She spun the tumblers back to random numbers. She stood in the hallway, listening to the shower turn off. She felt like a stranger in her own home. The walls, the photos of their wedding, the antique clock ticking in the foyer. It all felt like a set on a stage where a tragedy was being performed. She had to act. But how? If she confronted Arthur, he would panic. He might run. He might warn Veronica. If she did nothing, he would hand over classified schematics on Friday. Documents that could neutralize America's missile defense systems. She went downstairs and served dinner. She watched Arthur eat his pot roast. She watched him smile and talk about the weather. She looked at his hands, the hands that had held hers at the altar, the hands that were now stealing secrets for the KGB. "Is everything all right, Clara?" Arthur asked, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth. "You seem distant." "I have a headache," Clara lied. "Just a migraine." "You should lie down," Arthur said, feigning concern. "I'll clean up." Clara went to the bedroom, but she didn't lie down. She sat by the window and watched the street. She was thinking about duty. She had sworn an oath when she took her job at the Library of Congress, a civil service oath to protect the Constitution. It was a formality for a librarian, but for Clara, words mattered. She knew what she had to do. The realization made her want to vomit. She had to turn him in. But she couldn't just call the police. The police handled burglaries and domestic disputes. This was federal. This was espionage. The next morning, Thursday, Clara didn't go to work. She drove downtown, but not to the library. She drove to the J. Edgar Hoover building on Pennsylvania Avenue. She sat in her car across the street for an hour, watching the agents come and go in their identical suits. The building was a fortress of concrete, intimidating and cold. She couldn't just walk in. If she walked in, she lost control. They would arrest Arthur immediately. They would raid the house. The press would descend. Her life would be incinerated. She needed a contact. Someone who would listen, someone who would handle this with discretion. She remembered a name. An old friend of her father's, a man who had worked in naval intelligence years ago. He was retired now, but he knew people. She found a payphone and dialed his number. "Uncle Ben," she said when he answered. "It's Clara Sterling. I have a problem. A very serious problem. I need to speak to someone at the bureau, not a desk sergeant, someone in counterintelligence." Ben didn't ask questions. He heard the tremor in her voice. "Meet me at the diner on K Street in 30 minutes, alone." 2 hours later, Clara was sitting in a booth at a Greasy Spoon diner, across from a man who looked like a weary accountant. His name was Agent Miller. No relation to Veronica, he assured her dryly. He didn't take notes. He just listened as Clara laid out the facts. The matchbook, the gallery, the photos, the blackmail letter, the schematics for the prism array. When she finished, Agent Miller sat back and sighed. He looked at Clara with a mixture of pity and professional respect. "Mrs. Sterling," he said quietly, "you've done a very dangerous thing, but you've also done a very brave thing. If those schematics leave the country, the damage would be catastrophic." "I don't care about the schematics," Clara whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "I want to know if I can save my husband." Miller looked at his coffee. "I can't promise you that. Espionage carries a heavy price, even if coerced. But if he cooperates, if we can use him to get to the woman, it might mitigate the sentencing. It's his only chance. And yours." "What do I have to do?" Clara asked. Miller leaned in. "Nothing. You go home. You act normal. You let him think everything is fine. We need him to make that meeting on Friday. We need him to hand over the briefcase. We need to catch them in the act. You want me to let him commit treason?" "He's already committed treason, Mrs. Sterling. We need him to commit it where we can see it. We'll have a team on him 24/7 starting now. We'll wire your phone. But you have to be the best actress in the world for the next 24 hours. "Can you do that?" Clara thought of the woman in the red dress. She thought of Arthur's lie about the jazz record. She thought of the 18 years of trust he had incinerated for a thrill. "Yes," Clara said, her eyes hardening. "I can do that." Thursday night was a hallucination of normalcy. Clara sat on the sofa, knitting a scarf she would never finish. Arthur sat in his armchair, reading a journal on optics. The house was bugged. Agent Miller had sent a team disguised as telephone repairmen while Arthur was at work. There were microphones in the lamps, in the kitchen telephone, in the bedroom. Every sound they made was being recorded by a van parked down the street. The intimacy of their home had been violated, turned into a soundstage for a criminal investigation. Arthur seemed agitated. He kept checking his watch. He paced the room. "I have to work late tomorrow," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Don't wait up for dinner." "Oh?" Clara didn't look up from her knitting. "Another deadline?" "Yes, the final review for the Prism project. It's critical." "You work too hard, Arthur," she said. "You should ask for a raise." "It's not about the money," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's about legacy." Legacy. The word hung in the air, bitter and ironic. His legacy was going to be a mugshot and a federal prison number. Clara felt a surge of pity, quickly followed by revulsion. He really believed he was doing something noble, didn't he? Or maybe he had convinced himself he had no choice. The letter in the briefcase said otherwise. He had walked into the trap willingly. The blackmail only came after he had already taken the bait. "Arthur," Clara said, stopping her needles. "Do you love me?" Arthur looked up, startled. "Of course. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. Sometimes people drift apart. They find distractions." Arthur paled. He licked his lips. "I don't have time for distractions, Clara. I have work." He stood up and went to the kitchen. Clara heard the clink of a bottle. He was drinking heavily tonight. At 2 a.m., Clara woke up. The bed beside her was empty. She crept to the hallway. Light was spilling from under the study door. She heard the sound of paper being shuffled, the click of the briefcase latches. He was loading the documents. He was stealing the secrets of the United States government while wearing his pajamas. Clara went back to bed and stared at the ceiling. She cried silently, the tears running into her ears. She was mourning a death. Not Arthur's death, but the death of the man she thought he was. That man had never existed. He was a fiction she had co-authored for 2 decades. The next morning, Friday, was the day of the drop. Arthur dressed with trembling hands. He put on his gray suit. He picked up the briefcase. It looked heavier today. "I'm off," he said, standing by the door. Clara walked over to him. She adjusted his tie. She looked him in the eyes. She saw fear there, deep, primal fear. For a second, she almost told him, "Don't go. The FBI is outside. Throw the briefcase away." But she didn't. She couldn't. "Be careful," she said. "It's raining." "I will," Arthur said. He hesitated, then leaned in and kissed her forehead. "I'll see you tonight." "Goodbye, Arthur," Clara said. She watched him walk to the car. She watched him back out of the driveway. As soon as he turned the corner, a gray sedan that had been parked across the street started its engine and followed him. Clara closed the door. She slid down to the floor and buried her face in her hands. The waiting was over. Now, the trap would spring. Chapter 7. The Sting. The FBI operation was codenamed Red Prism. Agent Miller picked Clara up at 10 a.m. He drove her to a nondescript office building in Alexandria. Inside, there was a command center, a room filled with monitors, tape decks, and men in shirt sleeves smoking cigarettes. "We have him," Miller said, guiding her to a chair. "He's at his office now. We have surveillance on the gallery. Veronica Miller, real name Katya Volkov, KGB major, is there. She's expecting him at 6 p.m. "What happens now?" Clara asked, looking at the grainy black and white image of her husband's office on a monitor. "We wait," Miller said. "He has to make the delivery. Once the exchange happens, we move in. We take them both. And if he doesn't go, he'll go," Miller said grimly. "He's scared. Fear makes people predictable." The hours dragged. Clara watched her husband on the screen. He wasn't working. He was sitting at his desk, staring at the wall. Occasionally, he would touch the briefcase. He looked like a man waiting for an execution. At 5 p.m., Arthur left his office. The room in Alexandria tensed up. "Target is mobile," a voice crackled over the radio. "He's heading east on I-66, another voice reported, toward D.C. Clara watched the map on the wall as lights tracked his progress. He was driving toward DuPont Circle. "He's parking," the radio said, 3 blocks south of the target location. "Visual contact," a spotter reported. "Subject is exiting the vehicle. He has the package. I repeat, he has the package." On the main monitor, a camera across the street from the red door showed Arthur walking down the sidewalk. He looked small in the rain. He stopped in front of the gallery. He looked left, then right. Then he pushed the door open and went inside. "Okay, people, get ready," Miller barked. "Team 1, hold at the front. Team 2, cover the back alley. Wait for the signal." Inside the gallery, hidden microphones picked up the sound of a bell chiming. "Arthur," Veronica's voice came through the speakers, clear and purring. "You're late." "The rain," Arthur mumbled. Is anyone else here?" "We are closed. We are quite alone." "Here," Arthur said. The sound of the briefcase hitting a table. "It's all there. The refraction data, the power consumption logs, everything." "Good boy," Veronica said. Her tone shifted. It was colder now. "And the negatives? Did you bring the negatives?" I destroyed them," Arthur stammered. "Like you asked." "I hope so, Arthur, for your wife's sake." Clara flinched in the command center. "Now," Veronica said. "Let's see what you brought me." The sound of latches clicking, the rustle of paper. "Excellent," Veronica murmured. "Moscow will be very pleased. You've earned your place, Arthur." "Can I go now?" Arthur asked. "I just want to go home." "Of course," Veronica said. "Until next time." "Next time?" Arthur's voice rose in panic. "You said this was the last one." "Oh, Arthur," Veronica laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "There is no last one. You belong to us now." "That's the signal," Miller shouted. "Go, go, go." On the monitor, the front door of the gallery exploded inward. FBI agents in raid jackets poured in. "FBI, don't move. Hands where I can see them." Clara saw Arthur spin around, his face a mask of terror. He raised his hands. Veronica didn't panic. She calmly closed the briefcase and reached for her purse. "Drop the bag!" An agent screamed. "Drop it!" She dropped it. Agents swarmed them. Arthur was shoved against the wall, handcuffed. Veronica was led out in cuffs, her head held high, looking every inch the defiant spy. Clara watched as her husband was dragged out of the gallery and shoved into the back of a sedan. He looked broken. Agent Miller turned to Clara. "It's over, Mrs. Sterling. We got them." Clara looked at the empty screen. "No," she said softly. "It's just beginning."